Unmask the supernatural. Explore the history and future of parapsychology. Analyze legends and folklore. And welcome entertaining and informative guests as they probe irresistible mysteries that continue to haunt us. They may not always agree. In fact, they won't. But the dueling parapsychologists provide an investigative podcast that's not afraid to seek the truth and separate nonsense. With your hosts, Elliott Van Dusen and Darryll Walsh. Welcome to the Dueling Parapsychologist Podcast.
I just did a post actually today on our social media.
Oh yeah?
This is now episode number 5. So if you haven't heard any of our other episodes, we have our introduction to parapsychology episode, Poltergeist with Lloyd Auerbach, Demonology with James Anito, Carl L. Johnson, and Elise Carlson, and then episode 4 with Dedrick Hilton.
Yeah, you got it all right.
On Hoodoo. I got it all right.
There's no cue cards, so he did it good from memory.
So today we're doing a special Halloween episode.
Yeah, today we are. And we're going to talk about all things ghostly and talk about some of our favorite Nova Scotia ghosts, because that's where we're from. And ta-da! So, not only that, I'm sweating to death today for some reason. So, whatever, it is malaria. I said I can't wear even a costume, and thankfully Thanksgiving dinner is over, and I can get back to a nice light shirt for a change. Although this is going down to get me, but that's okay.
So this episode, because it's a special Halloween episode, Darryll, why don't you tell us a little bit of the history behind Halloween? Why is Halloween associated with ghosts and goblins and demons and devils?
Yeah. There's slight variations on it, but the essential story, why they picked the 31st, what became 31st of October, that is lost to history. But what it did, it symbolized, came right after they harvest everything. So it symbolized, in a sense, more of a changing in patterns, and so it marked this, and they also had the one in the beginning of May to mark again the big changes. So these people, of course, fear change. They, especially the more primitive, earlier, they'd be afraid that the sun would not come back up the next day, right? And so winter was a time of hardship. They hopefully had a good harvest and the proper animals they could slaughter over the winter, but still, because it was so dark, and they were still, as we still are, programmed to instinctually fear the darkness, that they had a ceremony to essentially tell the dead to stay the hell out of my house. So what they would do on what is now Halloween would be to, every house would dampen down their fires, put their fires out, except for one person would have a flame. And then they would go up to the top of the hill, to a bonfire that had already been built, and they would, as they did that, they would do it as in a procession, and the idea was the ghosts would follow them up the hill, and then they'd set the bonfire alight, and there were ceremonies and dancing and whatever, and then afterwards they would kill the fire and go back to their homes and hope that the ghosts, and the dead. See, while the bonfire was going, their Lord of the Dead would come and get, the souls that had died in the previous year. So that all was happening. So it was a celebration of that, and kind of almost like a sacrifice to it. And there is a question about that. A sacrifice of something made perhaps, so that the winter would not be too harsh. And now this is Celtic Ireland and England and Scotland, and so they have a pretty mild climate. Back then, particularly, it was it was reasonably good, and so it wasn't much of a in a sense the ceremonies were reinforced by the weather, because winter really didn't get too bad. So and then of course in the spring, on May 1st, they would have another Beltane. They would have another celebration to welcome the sun back and begin the growing season. So that's essentially just encapsulated, because I actually, when I teach the course, parapsychology takes up the whole 2 hours to go through it. So
Yeah.
I'm having to put a few things down. Now you can go on YouTube and type in history and origins of Halloween, and there's one with you can tell it was taken from a VCR, and there's just a woman, curly hair I believe, and she walks, she's got a cape, some kind of cape I think, or coat, and she walks, and it starts with eerie music. Now there's a ton of other ones that have been done recently. Look for this one. I believe it's the history and origins of Halloween, and she goes through and talks about it in much the same way I would do in my class. And so anyway, and I tend to watch that every Halloween until they get to the modern partying time, which I could care less about. I know about the history of modern Halloween, and it's funny because the British, of course, don't have Halloween. They have Guy Fawkes Day on the 5th of November. So they're just starting to get into it. And the funny thing is, Nova Scotia was the first place in Canada to start decorating for Halloween. We started it off in Nova Scotia.
I didn't know
that
either.
We did, and not that long ago. That was early 2000s. And so, we are the ones that started off. At least I remember when I'm walking. I think it was early 2000s. And so we did. And so Nova Scotia again, it's such a historic place, and it has, and it's such a rich history of, culture of the supernatural in that, and except for the culture of the supernatural, but the history in that. I mean, nobody knows that, for instance, some very famous war criminals were here. I want to say Tolstoy, but it's not him. Trotsky was here, and actually, on Citadel Hill, kept prisoner there for a while. And we have famous war heroes, and we have Civil War Medal of Honor recipients, 2 of them, I believe, buried in Holy Cross Cemetery. And it's funny, most people don't know all about all this, and I was talking to the mayor once, and said, something really should be more done about, the history and everything. It usually concentrates, obviously, on the 200 years of warfare that we had between the French and the British. And I would imagine that it'd be interesting to know if there hadn't been the great upheavals, how much more would have survived. Like, we don't have banshees, except for one. In Guysborough County, we don't have banshees, and they do over there. So,
Where does banshees originate from? What culture?
Banshee? I knew it. I can't remember without looking it up. It wasn't that long ago, because I was reading one of a book. I think I gave you a copy, and it came from, and I don't remember, so I won't drag it out. I just don't remember where it comes from exactly. It's Irish Celtic, I think. I'm pretty sure Irish Celtic. And she didn't go into anybody. It was a particular family. But of course, it expanded to include any family on, close to Halloween type of thing, and or even anytime during the year. So, but I like the idea of a banshee, and if you know Doctor Who at all, there's they have the screaming statues, and which are really cool, and screaming angels. Thank you, sound engineer comes to the rescue every time. And so anyway, also very horror films you'll have. In particular, I was watching The Cell, the Stephen King one, last night, and started watching it, and I had to get up and I got up and moved the furniture around, and went back and forgot about it. But anyway, the zombies in that one also screeched, and it's become a regular trope in horror films. And so taking that from the banshee, and but anyway, no, I wish we had more banshees. Nova Scotia, but we don't. We only got the one, as far as I can tell.
That's interesting, and I mean,
although there was a ghost that followed a guy here from McDougal, I would think. Anyway, came over on a ship. He was from obviously from Scotland, where he was bothered. He had murdered. I believe he had murdered his wife. And anyway, he came over here, landed at Pictou, and apparently her ghost followed him and wouldn't leave him alone until eventually died, and withered away and died. And so, so there is, she's not really a banshee, she's more of a vengeful ghost, type of thing, but she used to fall right behind him and drive him crazy and stuff like that. So that's about as close as we ever get. We do have a few of those about ghosts following people, but that's as close as we get, to a good banshee. So,
it's really interesting because when you look at kids dressing up in costumes too, you get some classic like paranormal, type outfits. You get witches, you get ghosts, werewolves, but you also get some nothing to do with the paranormal. You get people dressing up like
Donald Trump,
Disney princesses, things like that, right? But it's kind of funny, because like witches do get associated to Halloween, but really they really have nothing to do with Halloween. Although there was some speculation that some people accused of witchcraft were responsible for crops failing.
Yeah.
So maybe that's kind of how they got kind of tied in, because
they were a year-long thing.
Yeah, and when the witch hysteria started, they were basically blamed for any sort of social problem. Really, it was crops failing, the droughts.
And if you wanted to get rid of somebody you didn't like, you accused them of being a witch.
Exactly.
Thank you.
That's one of the reasons. Your neighbors or somebody that you made enemy in town, they'd say, "Yeah, he's into witchcraft," or "She's into witchcraft."
Or if they're like some people, like I have a cousin who's extremely quiet. That's just him. He's very insular and quiet. Once he tell you, if you, or hey, he can be very talkative. But he's just a quiet kind of guy. So if he was, let's say he was single, and this was 200 years ago, and he was female, and just happened to mind his own business, didn't feel like, maybe the town's full of jerks or something, and just mind his own business or her business. Sooner or later, somebody would point to them as being, a witch. Mainly because, of course, there's so many reasons for the witch hysteria, right? And like you said, if a person seems odd, if crops fail or anything like that, if people get sick, if the church wants more money, or ergot, a poison they thought, also because of the stressor of the fact of the Black Death and all that. So, you're starting to have 6 good, heavy reasons.
There's other reasons too. I just wrote an article for a demonologist friend of mine, Brian Taylor, for his demonology Facebook page, which has a lot of good information on demonology. If anyone's interested, look up b.e.taylor on Facebook. But there was other reasons too. If a woman was independent and didn't need a man, had some sort of independent wealth, they thought that she was a witch. If she had physical deformities, That's the hunchback, the typical hunchback, where the
osteoporosis, yeah.
the wart on the nose or anything,
Yeah.
any sort of disfigurement. They also blame
Yeah.
that on being a witch.
And if, of course, if she could cure things,
cure things through herbal ways,
Yeah.
like things that we would do, via a natural path or something like
Yeah.
that. And also midwives as well, because midwives would also use like natural remedies and stuff. So that a lot of the midwives got roped into
exactly
being accused of witches. Now the interesting thing is that a lot of people don't know this as well, is that so witches in Europe were burned at the stake. And it was funny, we just watched a movie today actually, it was Meadows' first movie that she ever saw, and it was The Addams Family too. And they wanted to go to Salem, and they had made a comment about that Wednesday was disappointed that they never made it to Salem, and Morticia said, talking about how, we know that you enjoy like your relatives being burned at the stake or whatever, but that's actually a misconception, because in America, which is where the Addams Family was in America, they were actually hung, and there was the odd exception, like I said.
Were any of them well hung?
Not that I know of.
There I go. I inserted
Not that I know.
the
But there
witch
was
penis
a male accused of witchcraft. It's either Corey Giles or Giles Corey. I can't remember now. It's definitely those two names, but I might have them mixed up. But he was actually pressed to death, where they stripped him naked. They put a plank of wood on him, and then they would continue to increase weight on him. And they wanted him to say whether or not he was guilty or not guilty of witchcraft, because they couldn't hold a legal trial. And anyway, he managed to survive the weight of the rocks for 3 days before he died of asphyxia. And he never did admit, whether he was guilty or not guilty. There's another witch that you and I are just doing some research on in Winsboro, South Carolina, and allegedly the folklore is that they tried to hang her and
Yeah.
she survived. And they did actually try.
Are we going to bring rope with us to see? Never mind.
they actually tried to burn her as well, but they burned the soles off her feet. And this wasn't a formal trial. Apparently, this was like basically some hillbilly South Carolina men that didn't like her. Kind of held their own trial in a barn, found her guilty, did all this stuff to her. She actually sued them and won. And she carried on her life until her 70s. So we're actually trying to find one of her descendants right now.
I'm curious how many of those men that accused her actually had sex with her.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That was another
the eternal love triangle, right?
That was another reason to accuse somebody of witchcraft as
Yeah.
well, if they were promiscuous as well.
And also, if you want to, she was the other woman, and yeah.
Unfortunately, and in the article I wrote for Brian Taylor, it was there was a lot of sexism going on. You know what I mean? Like 75% of the women or the people that were convicted of witchcraft were women.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was all independent women, promiscuous women, low-income women. Like even if they didn't have proper clothing, they would accuse them of witchcraft.
Yeah.
It was absolutely insane, really, when you actually look into the history of the witchcraft. Now, speaking of witchcraft, do you believe in spells and curses and witchcraft?
Before I answer that, there was one more reason. A lot of the Roman Catholic clergy, as well as some other clergies, particularly in the States, are shall we say, very conservative. It was a way to catch a glimpse, because the woman was stripped naked, right, for the trial, and so therefore you got to put in horniness as a causal factor for witchcraft. Do I believe in spells, curses, and hexes, and the whole shebang? Sympathetic magic, that's what that's called. And it's analogous to, as I said before, Roman Catholic prayer, let's say, or prayer of Christian prayer. No, I don't.
You don't?
No, at the end of the day, I'm trying to think if I can give up like a 1 or 2%, possibility. But no, I don't. I really don't. At all. And I could bring out, scripture or literature, or as it says it can't happen, or whatever, and that absolutely does. I don't even remember that stuff, so that doesn't have anything to do with my Roman Catholicism. Has nothing to do with my belief or disbelief in spells and witches and stuff like that. I believe in them on a cultural level. In other words, I believe they exist in our minds, and they exist in our fears and stuff like that, and I like that very much. But as to whether these kind of things can happen nowadays, or we have, most of the pagans are just this stuff was made up in the 20th century by Gardner, for God's sakes. He didn't even know what the Druids. The Druids, we don't know 95% of what they did. So how are you going to make something up that they did? So anyway, everybody making shit up in the 20th century, and so but anyway, I've been to Beltane, services, and and other ones, and I politely, I've got a magic wand supposedly given to me by a witch. So I mean, it's I'm polite and I'm curious, but I don't for a minute. Mainly because I don't believe in a main. How to express it? They're very. For instance, we pray to God. So God just if God exists and if He hears our prayers and if He chooses to act on them. I also believe in the benevolent caretaker model of the God. He sets things up, lets things go, and see how things are. Not that He can't interfere, but maybe He prefers not to most of the time. Unlike some people who think that what they had for breakfast was, ordained.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people make that argument when, historians confirm the fact that I'm kind of laughing in my inside because I had this discussion with Sarah a few times. But historians all don't disagree that Jesus Christ existed.
Yeah.
Whether he was a Jewish carpenter or he was the Son of God, I mean, is obviously up for debate. But a lot of people say that. Well, why didn't if the Almighty, powerful Father is up there, why didn't He stop the Romans from crucifying
But
Christ
that was the whole point.
and having him suffer? Yeah, and then that's of course
point.
That's of course the argument on it. Like,
Infographics did an excellent 10-minute thing of why Jesus Christ was the Son of God, and they proved it logically and rationally. I actually got it. I can send it to you.
I'd love to see that for sure. I think it
was fascinating. They could actually, if you were in a debate, they can actually take a position and, without relying on faith, which is what we usually have to rely on, and which I found fascinating that somebody could actually, do a rational, intellectual argument that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. And so it's fascinating, but
yeah, because a lot of people make that argument. Why didn't He save His own Son? Why would He let His Son go through all that? But then the Roman, Catholic preachings teach us that was the point.
So so that's how Halloween and it's jazz and how affected us and cultural changes, and now moving on to Europe and stuff like that. So yeah, Halloween's my favorite time of year. A lot of times I'm busy, of course, doing interviews and stuff like that. But
it does get busy. I find October is like the Paranormal Investigators Month because that's when cases seem to come in. That's when you seem to get podcast requests, media requests, and then it's kind of funny because then it just dies off.
Yeah, exactly.
October's
November,
like
that's it. You're out of a job.
100%. It's October is your month.
Is it? And it's got to be a good cold and kind of dark and creepy. And now it's starting to get that way. But not the cold part. With the warmer weather, it's hard to get people into the mood. And that's the whole thing. Halloween has this mood about it, right? And so it has a mood that makes it believable. And I think it could be that we still have some of that pagan belief in it's getting dark, nights are getting longer now, and the days are getting shorter, and that somehow, our natural fear of the dark, and just the fact that we're losing light and everything, makes it easy for us to believe in there's something in the woods. Or there's things that fly in the air, or that the dead can rise, or whatever it happens to be. But it's a time when your favorites come out. I have a few favorites, actually. I get asked always when I'm on, two things. One, I always ask if I believe in ghosts, and I never had a good answer until recently. And it's a shame that Rick Kyle from News 95.7 retired, because I had the answer for him this year when he had me on a show. He always had me on a show, and the last one we did was amazing. It was just amazing. And the funny thing is, it was in the middle of winter. It was like February. But anyway, so, Halloween's a time when you can dress up as your favorite character, like Michael Myers, 2018. And we're both anxiously waiting to see the movie. So that's coming out, the new one. And
October 15th.
Yeah.
The day before our big event.
A big event, exactly. So I guess the question, you've now finished your second book. And
third, just finished. Well,
sorry.
Yeah, third book.
That's right. I keep forgetting about
that comes out. So I have a date that it's coming out. It's coming out apparently on my mother's birthday, which I wasn't even aware of when I picked the date. But Tuesday, October 26th. It's got 42 or 43 new stories in it.
Good.
And Sarah has read it already and said she finds the stories are even more in depth and more entertaining than the last one. And the last one was,
your books always are better.
Yeah,
because you get better in time.
And it's a sequel to this one here, Supernatural Encounters, True Paranormal Accounts from Law Enforcement. So it kind of picks up exactly where this left off. It's kind of laid out the exact same way, with a bunch of different stories. The one Halloween kind of story.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there a Halloween story kind of?
The one Halloween story in this one, Supernatural Encounters, is Nellie Vaughn, and she's from the New England area. It's a little town called Coventry, Rhode Island. Yeah, so the one Halloween story in Supernatural Encounters is because I learned about it just before Halloween. It was about a month before. It was on September 1st, 2018, and the Coventry, Rhode Island Police Department had posted on their Facebook page saying that last night, so it would be, I guess, August 31st technically, that there was somebody reported running in what appeared to be a white dress or a white wedding dress screaming, "Help me." And so patrol officers went, made a patrol, didn't find anything. And so they posted on the Facebook asking for more information. And then, because, like I said, it was September 1st, getting close to that Halloween feel, they weren't making a joke about it. They were dead serious. They started talking about the cemetery that's their Plain Meeting House Cemetery. And that's where Nellie Vaughn is buried. And it's alleged that she wanders around saying that she's perfectly pleasant and not a vampire, because she died when she was 19, probably from consumption. That was going around at the time.
It was massive.
Same as Mercy Brown.
It makes the pandemic that we had look like a picnic.
Yes, and people were freaked out, with Nellie Vaughn, they thought she was a vampire because when they exhumed her body, she still had fresh liquid blood in her organs. But we found out later that was just due to the environment. It was due to temperature. It was due to the decomposition slowing down. But Nellie was also accused of being a vampire, so she apparently, her restless spirit roams around the cemetery saying that she's perfectly pleasant and not a vampire. I actually went out there. I was in Rhode Island at the time that I heard the story, so I went out to the graveyard. And on the way there, something strange happened. The wipers on the vehicle started to go high speed on their own. It was almost exactly 3 minutes out from the cemetery, and wasn't a stitch of moisture in the air that day. Actually had to turn the wipers off because they were on auto. Turn them off. It was still going, and it actually didn't stop until we parked right at the cemetery where Nellie Vaughn is. As soon as the car went into park, the wiper stopped, which was weird. It could be a total mechanical motor issue or whatever, but it's just strange. You're going to this alleged haunted cemetery and this strange event.
If she could make the wipers move, she could appear to you. You know what I mean, or talk to you. So yeah, it's.
Yeah.
I know
And,
people complain that the batteries die and they're out in the cold. Well, yeah, your batteries are going to die faster. You know, so. But the interesting thing about the woman in white is that in the white dress, screaming "Help me!" we have that. You know, here a lot of women in white all over the province, except they don't say anything. Now, there's another difference between European and North American legends. You know, their hours have deviated from the original.
Well, it's interesting you mention that because with our event coming up at the Westin, I talked to a former employee there, and she talks about a lady in white. Basically, it's a nightgown that wanders the 8th floor and has appeared in people's rooms, but the customers have never said that she's actually said anything to them. She just either materializes in the room, or she's actually seen walking through their hotel room door, and then continues to walk and just disappears, but has never actually said anything. So it's really interesting that you bring that point up.
A lot of women in white Nova Scotia, a lot of women in grey, mostly up the eastern shore. There might be one in Annapolis Royal area, but women in white particular. There's one woman in a blue dress. That's out
Peggy's Cove.
Yeah, Peggy's Cove. Wait, there's also one in Indian Harbor. It could be the same ghost. Let's see. This one's kind of weird because it's connected to a different story, which creeps me out because it's very close to where I used to always go as a kid. Until very recently, we owned land in Cape Breton, Richmond County, River Bourgeois. And of course, every time you guys are going to Sydney, you take a picture of the sign that says 40 Mountain Road, River Bourgeois for me.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's become a habit. And so somewhere near, just before you get there, somewhere near Cleveland, I think, there's supposed to be the Black Ground, which is from a book, 1991 by someone Sampson, which is not surprising because all the Sampsons and Legiers and Burks and all that down there. But I can't think the first name. Oh God. Anyway, talks about this area that I've asked you to look into if you drive by anytime. Try to see if you can find where it would be. But anyway, the strange noises, the beast sounds are coming, and the strange fogs and all this kind of stuff that appears that the ground is not necessarily cursed, but there's something weird going on there. Much like I think the ground where the McDonald House for that poltergeist, the Caledonia Mills spook farm.
Yes, yeah.
I think I think it was because they were on the wrong ground. They put the house in the wrong spot. But anyway, in the black ground, there were two old women, all dressed in black, seen walking, and people would call to them, and they would not answer. They'd walk and then walk into the woods. So we don't have very many creatures or things running around that all dressed in black. So that's also adds kind of a bit of a flavor to that story that has stuck with me, and just the idea of cursed grounds. I often thought about doing a book on that actually, and that, or just areas that just kind of, you would say, you would look in the sky, find these areas that, UFOs. I prefer to find areas that have clusters of weirdness type of thing. Route 666 is supposed to have, it's supposed to be a haunted highway, for instance, and we have our own in Waverly, of course, with the trucker that picked up the phantom hitchhiker. So, a female phantom hitchhiker. So, we've got a lot of wandering women that just never seem to make where they're going.
No, it's true, yeah. And the other thing that's interesting too is you always hear stories of headless apparitions. And I know in one of your books, I think it's probably in both of your Ghosts of Nova Scotia, but there's the headless nun on Highway 3 between East Chester and Chester.
Yeah.
But then last week we just spoke to Dedrick Hilton about a headless individual down in South Carolina that allegedly might have fell into a wood chipper or some sort of combine. And it's interesting that these apparitions appear without their head as well, because we always talk about ghosts using extrasensory perception to project themselves to us so that we can see them, and that's why they appear in different clothing sometimes, or they can appear younger or older. And for example, I know people have seen my dad at my mom's old house in Lower Sackville, and one person has reported him looking close to 48. That's how old he was when he died. He looked very old and frail because the Hep C had damaged his body. But then Mom's new husband saw him when he was younger and more healthier looking. And it's kind of interesting because if you think about it, the witness that saw him before he was going to die, it's an old family friend that's in her 70s or 80s, and he has nothing to prove, but he may have wanted to project himself to look more younger, stronger, healthier to this new man that's now in Mom's life. You know what I mean? So, but it's interesting because
jealousy from beyond the grave.
Well, yes, because you hear stories about how different people have seen the same apparition, but they look different. They're younger, older, wearing different clothing. So it's interesting that these people who have died, like that headless nun in Eastchester, or the guy that got caught up in the combine down in the Carolinas or southern U.S., would appear and project themselves without having their head, because that's actually very rare when you look at apparitions. Like even people that, for example,
in modern time.
Well, even what's the name of those apparitions? Not the crisis apparition, but the after death, after death apparition, basically, within 24 hours, after somebody dies. Even if they die in a horrific car accident, they're not appearing to their family member or their friend all mangled up in the car. They're appearing to them as you would recognize them, right?
Yeah.
So maybe it's a crisis apparition. Yeah, maybe it is. I get them all. They all blend together. Especially, we always do these podcasts late at night, and they all blend together.
And not only that, but I mean, that's introductory parapsychology, and it's something that you learned, in our case, 20 years ago. And it can be, it's hard sometimes to think, okay, what are the 4 types of apparitions? If somebody asks you. So it's not,
Well, yeah, so it's interesting that, there you have, someone gets mangled up in a car accident and appears to their friend perfectly healthy, but yet you've got this headless nun walking by, or this guy that got caught in a combine, with no head.
Yeah.
And actually, in a story in More Supernatural Encounters, my new book that's coming out, there was a police officer that saw a guy. I think he was missing his upper torso part. So it was just a lower torso part.
Wow.
Like a partial apparition kind of thing, but it looked like he had been mangled from the top up. So it's interesting how some people are reporting, this projection, which is not typical, right? It's not a typical thing. What are some other kind of Halloweenish type stories that you like from, even any from your book?
Well, first thing, do bring up, when we have our little dual episode, do bring up ESP as an excuse for ghosts. So I have a few things to say about that.
Perfect.
Anyway, we're okay. Where am I?
You do know what I will be bringing up, and it will.
Listen, that has nothing to do with. That would be something different than traditional ESP, as well as it being total bullshit, of course. But anyway,
We'll have a few things to bring.
Yes, we'll have a few things. We can separate that actually out, because that way we can just scream at each other. And end the show that way, breaking up the place. But anyway, my favorite, there's 180 at the time in 2010 when I brought out the 10th anniversary of Ghost Nova Scotia. Ta-da! I put 180 stories in this book, and some are longer, some are much shorter. But mine's more of a tour, of the province. So it's actually is a tour. You can drive around the province in order and get these stories. And so I thought, of course, I had them all, and then 5 minutes after it's published, all of a sudden you find a treasure trove of stories every time. So I had a lot more to, into, and I actually started to get, because it was my second one, or second version, I started thinking more about them, and which ones were interesting. And in 2010, I decided that black dogs were my favorite. Phantom black dogs, that is, not just black dogs.
There was a strange dog actually in the Caledonia Mills case.
I was going to bring that up right now. You're right. And there's also, one that she actually interacted with. Mm-hmm. And so...
Yeah, they said actually Mary Ellen used to play with it. They thought it was a stray dog. But the first time that the family had noticed it was when Janet McDonald, I believe that's the wife's name, was getting frustrated with her mother, who it sounded like she had major neurocognitive disorder, was starting to lose her mind. They were looking after her at the farmhouse, and she screamed at her one night that she hopes that the devil takes her by morning, and the next morning the mother died. Yeah. But this black dog was seen roaming around inside their house, which is interesting. Then the second time that the dog appears is when the neighbors are coming up to the house to help them with the fires. There was a black dog kind of trailing behind them. So they had made mention to the McDonald's that this dog was following from behind them. And they said, yeah, we've seen that dog before. And they explained the first time they saw it. And they also said that it kind of showed up on the farm once in a while. Mary Ellen played with it, and it didn't really bother the animal, so they didn't really think too much of it. Was it a stray dog? Was it a phantom dog?
Exactly.
Very, very interesting.
There's supposed to be, we only have one or two in Nova Scotia. Scottsburn, near New Glasgow, has on just a little bridge crossing, there is supposedly a black dog with red eyes. That haunts that particular spot. And other than that, a black dog was seen, of course, on the black ground in Cape Breton as well. So, that's about it. We really haven't taken black dogs, the phantom black dogs, wholeheartedly over here, and they didn't. Mainly because the stories originated in England with specific incidents in churches and stuff like that. Unlike, say, zombies, vampires, ghosts, that just could, for any old reason, could show up. These dogs were taken to be demons or be the devil himself, and attacked these churches and terrified the parishioners. So yeah, I'm not surprised that didn't get transferred over very much, here. So anyway, yeah. So I mean, it's still my favorite. I still like the idea, of course, and there's so many good ones out there. It's hard to. I mean, I could talk about, Oak Island, or I could talk about the ghosts on Oak Island, and actually, this is, I think, new folklore. There's supposed to be a dog on Oak Island. Now that I think about it, stories are being created now out of their people's heads, and I don't like that idea. Although technically, it could be the exact same way all the 180 stories that I got in my book started off as. I don't say these are true, and I don't even bother thinking about whether or not they could be valid. But anyway, I just don't like the idea of people that are doing ghost tours and this kind of thing, and they just make stuff up out, make things more exciting. Citadel Hill was never haunted until it became a money-making thing, and then all of a sudden it's just filled with ghosts. Has its own stamp. I was contacted by somebody in the media. We'd like to interview about the new Citadel Hill's new stamp. And I said, oh, well, thank you, but I said, why would I have any comment, on Citadel Hill? What can I'm a parapsychologist. Well, it's the gray lady, from Ghost from Citadel Hill. And my answer was, and since when has Citadel Hill been haunted? I said, if no researcher, previous writer, or me has heard of any stories in Citadel Hill, then there is no ghost in Citadel Hill. I said it's being made up, manufactured, and sure enough, then the tours and everything. But anyway, you get that stuff you got to deal with. But I like the older historical stuff, And
What about the witch's house on Roby Street?
it's an interesting story. I get asked about all the time. There's, a couple of reasons why. There's a main reason why. There's a black window, and there's a wall behind there.
Is it because, as folklore says, a gentleman saw some witches in there doing some witchcraft?
Supposedly, he saw the witches outside, or he was inside, saw the witches outside, or what was the other ones? That's the most recent one, but there's 3 reasons why. Oh, somebody hanged themselves, and the very first one, that was a boy, I believe, and the very first one I heard, I can't remember. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, the witches seems to be sticking with it, and so anyway, that's probably the one that will go down as the witch's house on Roby Street, which was actually the Caldwell House, the house for the first mayor of Halifax. And of course, at that time, its land went from Quinpool Road down to South Street. That's how big it was. And so anyway, yeah, there was a lot of you got a real good estate when you bought land in Nova Scotia back in the 18th, 19th century. And so anyway, I want to get in the house. I'm going to contact the owner and ask to see the house. And but I'm more curious about the house than I am necessary. I don't believe that witches were dancing. I don't believe somebody hanged themselves. And whatever the first one was, I'm not necessarily all there for that one either. So I'll just. But I am very much interested in its architecture. In its fact, it does look a little bit old and because it's in Georgian, style, so it has an old look to the house. I was surprised that the side you can actually walk right up to the house because it's the house on the corner is been turned into a tenement or something, and it's got parking lot, so you can walk right up and touch the window if you want. And maybe you should do that on Halloween night at midnight. And see what happens if witches dance. So I like it because it's a touchstone of Halifax, and a few other places, and it's it's something that you can't is exciting and you can't prove, and you don't need to prove it even if you wanted to. So
see, my mind is spinning from our Ghost Project Canada side of things, because another story in Halifax is the church window that has the figure of the priest.
Yes.
So it's another correlation or another similarity. You know what I mean? There's the window that the witches allegedly turned black. And the story goes is that if they replace the window, it will turn black.
Yeah.
And it's the same as is it St. Paul's Church across from
St. Paul's Anglican.
So St. Paul's Anglican, same thing. There's been a few different stories. It was a priest's head that went through the window. It was a pianist that was in there practicing's head that went through the window. Ultimately, somebody went through the window, and apparently it does fit the
profile of
profile.
He wasn't a priest. He was wasn't a pastor or minister. He was some sort of special person in the church. I don't know if he was like the equivalent of a bishop or something like that. And his head apparently went out the window.
Apparently, I went on the church's website once and I couldn't find any sort of comment on it. But apparently, the church has made a comment that it does resemble a priest or a pastor at that time.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But that's another kind of weird mythology type thing where if the windows change out, the figure comes back, right? So it'll be interesting once we input all this stuff into the database that Spencer's building to kind of see the different correlations that pop up, right?
Yeah.
It's very fascinating as scientists, I think.
The interesting is also across from the Five Fishermen restaurant, which again, was haunted, but then all of a sudden it took off, and there was a whole bunch more ghosts than was originally said. And so, and a good friend of mine was the ghost interpreter, so to speak, there. Leonard Curry, he was a waiter there for many years, and till he retired. And then he was the guy who knew all the ghost stories. And I remember I was there in 2000, eating, and I said to him, "Why did you never tell me there were ghosts here?" And he just, Leonard just has this smile. You just can't get mad at Leonard. And this just smiles. I don't know. So I just left it at that.
Wow.
But I like rural ghosts. I like the headless nun type of thing. I like even the silly one, like the goose that's also supposed to be seen down there on the road. Headless goose. And but I like the idea of, and I always did when I was a kid, used to go visit my uncle and aunt in Chevry, and it's a long drive, and so anyway, Mom and Dad took the long way as well. But on a winter's night, and the moon would be shining on the snow, and at that time there were 3 trestle bridges, which have been replaced, of course, because they look way too cool. So let's put something concrete and boring in its place. So and for some reason, I always thought trestle bridges were scary. That they were, there's one that used to cross the Bear River, and we wouldn't. It looked so old and decrepit. We actually didn't go across. Now I wish we did, but at the time we were all too scared. Mom, Dad, and I think it must have been Jackie and I in the backseat, and my middle sister, and those 3 trestle bridges, and then you'd see the house up on maybe on the hill, and one light in the window, and very romantic yet lonely and desolate, much like the moors of England, which I like, and Ireland, and so which is why I like around Placentia in Newfoundland. I like that. It has something. It has atmosphere. Roby Street's too noisy. There's buses. There's a bus stop just almost right in front of the door. There's it's really almost to the corner. It's the house itself, but it doesn't have at least it's got a little bit of a look to go with it. Some of the other ones are just St. Paul's Anglican is at least old enough, and of course same thing with the Five Fishermen, which used to be in Undertakers and had bodies of the Titanic there.
And the Halifax explosion too.
Yeah. So anyway, I like my rural ghosts and that, but I was really happy when I did Legends and Monsters of Atlantic Canada that I could delve into other provinces, legends, in particular another Oak Island type of story in Newfoundland. But for this one, I lucked out that I came across forestry industry or lumberjack stories, and we don't have all of them down here, but we have an awful lot. So there's various creatures, gumbaroos, for instance, and highbines, and all these kind of things, and things that you should, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you should not do, should not do when you work in the forest, and which is expected, because we do have a fear of the woods, right, ingrained in us. So who but lumberjacks would naturally, obviously, be a perfect, people to learn about anything that was weird going on, and also they would create stories as well, to go along with their, where they happen to be working at. And so, they wouldn't be making up stories of the sea. They'd make up stories of the woods, the same as sailors make up stories of the sea.
Well, yeah, and that kind of makes sense. That's where they spend most of their time.
Yeah.
You often get lumberjacks reporting, Bigfoot sightings, actually.
Yeah.
Like loggers, for example, I'm thinking up in Wati, Northwest Territories, they believe that the Bushman, or Naga as he's called in their language, is responsible for missing bush camp workers. One of the most famous UFO abduction site came from loggers. It was Travis Walton and crew.
There's a doc coming out on him.
They all a documentary
series or a doc on Netflix, I think.
He still does lectures to this day.
Yeah.
He was so close here. I think he was in New Brunswick. I think he went to New Brunswick when they put the Stanton Friedman display on at the Fredericton Museum, and I was so pissed because by the time I found out about it, it was happening like that day.
Yeah.
So there's no way that I could rip up and see it. I would have loved to have gone up there and met him, but all of them passed the polygraph except except for one guy, he scored inconclusive. Inconclusive, in my experience, being a police officer, can just be that somebody was nervous and things like that, right? So.
And in science, we know that polygraphs are useless as tits on a bull, so it proves nothing, unfortunately. So. But we'll argue about that.
No. You know what? I actually agree with you because it's based on how the polygraphist scores it.
Yeah.
And I've actually had a case where it was misscored and somebody walked away on it. So they're not 100%.
No.
If I was ever asked to take a polygraph, I'd probably tell the person to go fuck their hat. There's no way that I would take one.
There was one, and I would have to say this on, I won't, because I've been lecturing 20 years that polygraphs are useless. So if I take one, am I not then, being a fool? Interesting thing was, there was an incident many years ago that Halifax Police, and at the time I was working at the police club, so I got to hear about it, and it was because it turned out, anyway, a policeman was centered on the investigation because he wouldn't go take a polygraph. He told them to fuck themselves. And when they got to court, found out there was like 18 other people that had access to that money. So the judge threw it out and said it was a stupid case. But they just hyper-focused on this particular person. Maybe they don't like them, whatever reason, trying to build up a big case. Probably they couldn't build a case for the other 18, and you got pressure to do it because it was, in the courthouse itself. So, but yeah, he said most policemen would.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I mean, and in my next book, I managed to find a treasure trove of stories for it, if I can sit my butt down and finish it once Bigfoot and Jack the Ripper are zooming either to Amazon or to regular publishers. And I've got some stories that nobody else has and probably can't find. So it's going to be good to bring out something that's fresh rather than regurgitate some old stuff. Now, Vernon Oikel, his last book, he was able to find some fresh stories that just didn't just happen. There was a few, but I prefer the ones that have a bit of a legacy to them. That there's generations of the family have noticed it, or a particular location has it's attached to, like for instance, Bigfoot supposedly in Nova Scotia in Green Hill, and for the record, he's not in Nova Scotia, but there's that spot where he's supposed to be. Various people have seen him, so it's different than just somebody moves into a house and the house was not haunted for 100 years, and all of a sudden now it's this hot spot of being haunted. So yeah, I like the ones with the bit of the ones that don't clash with my scientific rationality.
Mm-hmm.
Too much,
No, that makes sense. Like, the reason why I enjoy
makes it easier to go along with the story and not analyze it in your head, right? So
the reason I enjoy the two police books that I've written on the supernatural is because most of them are new, unheard stories. And if the people hadn't felt comfortable talking to me about it, we wouldn't even know about it. Like in the new book coming out, there's a really cool near-death experience. There's also a really cool residual haunting down in Stellarton. Those are stories that we wouldn't know,
Yeah.
And so it's really cool. But also the historical ones too, where for generations people are saying that they are experiencing this or seeing this too. That's really cool too, because where there's smoke, there's usually fire. So.
Yeah. So that's and then of course we could bring science in and try to figure out why people would see generation after generation see the same thing. The Stellarton residual haunting, was that the one that both of us heard about?
No, that's not even that one.
That couldn't, because he wasn't the police.
No, that wasn't even this one. So this one, it's a really cool story. I'll share it in the spirit of Halloween. I called it in the book a murder in progress. So what happened is there's a Canada Post Office down the road from the Stellarton Police Detachment. And
funny, I noticed it. The post office, when we were going to our residual
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Because it looked nice and everything, and for some reason it stayed in my mind.
That's right.
It's
So
interesting.
apparently above Canada Post there is an apartment or a couple of apartments that are normally rented out, but there's one in particular that's been vacant for quite some time. So the police officer was working a night shift one day. He was talking to the dispatcher, and a call came in, and it was a janitor that works at Canada Post. And he said that he could hear a female screaming, sounded like she was being beaten. Could hear furniture breaking and things being thrown upstairs. It almost sounded like somebody had put someone through drywall. So he calls 911, saying there's some sort of disturbance above him. So it was actually quicker for the police officer and his female partner to run down the road rather than go out the back door, go into the police car, get out the security, and drive there. So they just basically, he's right in the dispatch office, here's the call come in, he runs out to the bullpen, grabs his partner, they run out.
Yeah.
Meet the janitor explains to him that it's an apartment upstairs, not supposed to be anybody in it, opens the door, police go in, not a stitch of furniture in this place. It's completely black, there's nobody in there, there's not even any furniture in there, there's no damage in there. They start clearing the rooms. When they get to the final room at the bottom, before they go in, the male police officer stops his female partner and says, just hold on a sec, takes his flashlight out, turns the light on, rolls it on the floor, and you can see a thin layer of dust on the floor and no footprints on it. So he brings his flashlight out to the hallway, does the same thing in the hallway. They can see the military police boots from those two walking down the hall. No one had been in this apartment for quite some time. So they clear the apartment, there's nobody in there. They go back out to the janitor who's waiting outside until it's safe. Tells him, listen man, there's nobody there. And he's like, I'm telling you, I heard fighting in there. They have to be on the roof. And the police are like, how do you get to the roof? The only way to get into the roof is from this apartment. You have to go through a window out to the fire escape. So they go in, but it was, when people are careless in the old days and they paint over the windowsill and they don't seal it off. Yeah. Well, the window was painted shut, so there was no possible way that somebody could have got out there. It wasn't broken. So they tell the janitor that, and he's like flipping out. He's like, listen man, I believe what you're calling and reporting, but I'm just telling you, like, there's no way someone's on the roof and there's nobody in here. There's not even any furniture in here. So it's all quiet at that point, so they go back to the office, write the report up, finish their night shift, sorry. Day shift comes on, and about noon, after he's gotten a few hours sleep, the chief of police calls him, and he picks up the phone, and the chief's kind of still chuckling on the other end of the phone, and he says, hey, he's like, I'm just calling about your report you submitted, can you tell me what happened? So he tells him the full story again, and then he says, you know what, he's like, that's actually not the first time that we've been called there before. He said several years ago, a woman was actually murdered in that apartment with a butter knife, and it was a really gruesome murder.
Oh, it would be with a butter knife.
With a butter knife, think of how dull it is. Yeah. So the partner had attacked the female with a butter knife and murdered her to death with it. Then he said, not only was there the murder there, but then after the murder, there was one time when Canada Post was open and operational, and customers were in there and the staff were in there, and they could hear a domestic disturbance going on up there. So of course they phoned the police, and when the police attended, it was the same thing. There was absolutely nothing there. So I think personally that to me sounds like a residual haunting because of the amount of high energy that would have been available during that murder, and what a tense and stressful situation that would be, that somehow the environment has recorded a certain segment of that, because they always hear the fighting and the screaming from the woman sounding as if she's being murdered, and sure enough, a woman actually was murdered in that apartment.
Yeah, interesting anyway.
Yeah, really, really interesting. It's one of my favorites in the new book. So it's really interesting.
Cool.
It's funny actually. The other residual haunting that you just mentioned as well. That's almost like a woman in white kind of figure that we.
Yes, wasn't it? Yeah.
Because she was like wearing this olden dress, and she didn't actually talk to him. Now this kind of weird. Was you and I were thinking it's residual, but there was like one little thing where like he kind of called out to her one final time, and it's almost like she turned and kind of smiled. But like we were also saying too, her kids were still playing up in the tree. Was she looking back at the kids and kind of smiling, or did she actually acknowledge them through a smile? But she never spoke. Yeah. Because he kept saying, remember they were sitting around the campfire, and he kept saying, can I help you? Like, because she's basically walking on his property.
Yeah, were you almost right by them actually, because the bridge across the gorge there was actually closer to where they are now, their back door, and so yeah, so she's essentially almost walking right by them. So
Yes.
you know, and yeah, so that was an interesting story last October we heard.
Yeah.
When we were down there, and it was so beautiful too because the leaves were all orange, and
Yeah.
I was thinking about how nice it'd be to sit out in the front and with the field and the trees
And it was a nice rural property, like
Yeah.
what you said. It was one of those rural ghost stories. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
exactly.
Like it had the feel of
Yeah.
a Halloween type story, really.
Yeah, it did. It did. So Halloween's that's the best time to of the year, and many people do. And of course, every year Facebook there are memes coming on September 1st saying, "Don't put up your Halloween decorations now," because there's people and pumpkin spice. They also talk about how they'll kill anybody has pumpkin spice coffee or something in September, and but that's really taken off as well. So pumpkin spice coffees, but yeah. So I mean, you know, there's so many. I mean, well, 3 years ago, 3 weeks before my mother died, I had taken care of my mother and father for about 12 years. And as they progressively got old, actually longer, as they progressively got older, and then Dad died of leukemia, and then Mom was alone, and then she had cancer, or well, she wasn't alone, I was in the basement apartment. Got cancer, fought cancer, lived on, died September 30th, 2018. Anyway, 3 weeks before that, I said to my sister, I said, listen, I'm going on vacation. I haven't had vacation in a long time. I don't know who's looking after Mom, but it's not going to be me. And so anyway, I thought she owed me because they're always going away and all this. And I thought, no, I'm owed a vacation. And Carol, yeah, no problem. She'll be able to take care of it. In fact, she spoiled Mom. I get back and I'm expected to do all the stuff that Carol was doing. So anyway, it backfired in that way. But where we were was Spry Bay. And in this little hunting, cabin type of thing. And so hunting, fishing, and we had to go down and get our water from the inlet type of thing, and the ocean, and if we wanted to flush the toilet, stuff like that. So the interesting thing I didn't almost forgot about was the fact that Spry Bay was one of the places where a ship on the eastern shore, a ghost ship is seen coming into the bay and going up into the land. And that was precisely where we were.
That's interesting.
And it was just so cool, right? I'm thinking I'm right in a spot, that's supposed to be, haunted. And not only that, but has a long history of it. And so, it was really fascinating to...
especially with ghost ship stories, because normally you see them or hear about them being reported in the water.
Yeah.
Not necessarily...
And then coming up on land, every 7 years. And so it was, the number 7, of course, obviously has a great deal to do with stories in Nova Scotia. And lots of things. Treasure comes up every 7 years, or somebody appears every 7 years, a ghost will appear, or something like that. I like the stories where they're supposed to appear every year on a particular date. Like the old woman sitting in an old nun, I believe she was, sitting the old King's Edgewood campus, and I think and watch and just be sitting in this spot, and it'll be a New Year's Day every year. So that's the kind of thing you can appreciate, and you can also go and check.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. For sure.
And
And that usually falls along the residual haunting as well, because it would be like a recording type.
Exactly.
Haunting, yeah.
And speaking of residuals, I think we should mention for anybody that happens, that's in Nova Scotia, is the Esther Cox Fest that's starting on the 22nd of October. For a long time, when I did Shadowhunter and I was the host, narrator of Shadowhunter, we interviewed Shirley Reindress, who had put on a play in Sackville, New Brunswick, where we interviewed him. and everything went wrong with that play. That could, and
Trying to say the play is actually cursed. Or
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean a lot of stuff apparently is also related to that poltergeist incident. Esther Cox, "You were mine to kill," was written on the wall, supposedly by the poltergeist, and all this. And so he's always thought that there should be some kind of festival going on with it. And I've always said to him, yes, So on the 22nd, I'll be there. If I have to borrow your car, I will. I'm going up there to Amherst. I want to see part of this. I'll get some good B-roll. I can interview him. Maybe if you can get away. It's hard with a young kid, but
it is, I'll find out what's going on because I tagged in that article on the. I guess it's like a week-long festival.
Yeah.
It sounds really interesting. The other event going on, well, I mean, there's lots of Halloween events going on in the paranormal, but ours is on Saturday, October 16th. I think we have 50% of our seats sold right now. There's still 6 days left to get tickets. Total cost is $136 roughly with taxes and fees in. We've explained it a few times. Most of the cost goes to the venue, plus 3-course meals, plus some complimentary wine, and then of course we've run a few ads. You've got one going right now on
I've
Facebook.
got 3 going. One for Halifax, one for Nova Scotia, one for Canada.
Wow.
Because I wanted to see the feedback from all 3 different. If I just put it, the first ad they didn't run. Actually, Facebook never ran it.
Is that the day it crashed?
It must. Yeah, that must have what happened. It never did run. If they had sent me a thing saying it was going to run, but it must have been the crash. I did it. But so anyway, I thought, oh, okay. And so I thought, well, I'm going to hit up all 3. And I want all Nova Scotia, but and I was kind of curious about the analytics, and so that's why I did all 3 of those. Although the Canada one only ran for 3 days, and
so you run 3 ads. I've run 3 ads as well. So there's the advertising costs, and of course miscellaneous materials as well. Darryll and I have business cards and certain things like that at the event. So anyway, there's not much that we can do about the pricing. It is what it is, as they say. But it's for a good cause. Any money that's left over goes into our non-profit organization called the Canadian Association of Parapsychological Research and Investigation, which operates as Paranormal Phenomena Research Investigation, Center for Parapsychological Studies in Canada, and Ghost Project Canada. Because again, we do all kinds of free services. Darryll and I are trying to collect stories.
All the money we could have all the money we put into the paranormal over the years.
My suspending is already, as a director of PPRI, my spending is suspended by Sarah, my fiance, who's also our chief financial officer, because I have totally blown the budget. I actually made a joke the other night. I said, well, we should have a referendum to change the financial, because I guess our financial year is April to April.
Oh, okay.
I said, we should have a referendum so that come January I get new budget money, and she goes, no, you still would not get budget money. So yes, unfortunately, Darryll, myself, and Spencer, because Darryll runs the center and Ghost Project Canada, I run PPRI and Capri, and so does Spencer. But the 3 of us, basically, it's all funded out of our own pocket, kind of thing. Which, sadly, I am working on an article called "Profit the Paranormal," and it'll explain, the difficulties that parapsychologists and paranormal investigators have.
Make sure we put that on Ghost Project Canada's website.
Yeah, no, we will, because I'm hitting on everything. I'm hitting about how academia suffers as well, because you've got, like Michael Persinger was operating under the guise of neuroscience, right?
Yeah.
When he was doing parapsychological work, that's what a lot of parapsychologists have to do. They have to plug it in from a psychology standpoint or a sociology standpoint, and get funding backdoor to fund their parapsychological stuff.
Exactly.
Because it's just not. It's waned, I guess.
Yes, very much so. Everybody thinks they can get their answers on the internet or the TV by watching one of those silly shows. That's the problem. So real hard work of finding out and trying to discover things is just, there's just not much funding for that at all. It's ridiculous. And Lloyd Auerbach said that in his book from 20 some odd 30 years ago, which I read and which got me into this more or less. And that's what he said. Yeah, you'll starve to death if you think you're going to live off of, parapsychology.
Yeah.
And so a few people have managed to.
There's only one person I know that's actually doing like full-time parapsychological work and being paid for it, and that would have to be Carolyn Watt at the University of Edinburgh's Kessler Parapsychology Unit. She's the only one that is a parapsychologist.
She's the chair, isn't she?
She's the chair of it. She teaches parapsychological courses. She takes understudies that are doing their degrees in parapsychology. She's probably one of the only people. Lloyd Auerbach has a full-time job doing other stuff that's non-parapsychological. So,
wow.
You know.
Yeah. So anyway, it's this time of year. It's a great time of year. Hopefully, you can take in the film fest or our thing at the Weston next Saturday, and just some of our favorite stories. But we'll be doing this again, and at Christmas time is another time for talk about what Christmas. We'll be doing the traditional English Christmas ghost.
I'm hoping to have a special guest for that.
That's right. Yes,
I gotta reach out for that.
Yes, that's right. You said that.
I will. But until next time, follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook under the Dueling Parapsychologist podcast. We also upload this to Anchor FM, which goes out to a bunch of different platforms such as SoundCloud and Apple Podcasts. What else?
I don't know. Can't you just say goodbye? We're running out of the time, so we'll have to start all over.
Until next time. See you later.
The Dueling Parapsychologist Podcast, an educational and entertaining podcast with Canadian parapsychologists Elliott Van Dusen and Darryl Walsh. To reach out to the Dueling Parapsychologists, see our Facebook page, Twitter, and Instagram accounts, or email us directly at info@ppri.net.